Well, hello, friends, and welcome to Texas Impact's Huntsville Faith and Democracy event, the first in our new season of online conversations throughout the state featuring faith and community leaders, advocates, and Texas Impact staff talking about the importance of Texans of faith engaging in the policy process and giving nuts and bolts advice on how to be effective advocates as we move into this election season and the 2021 Texas legislative session. My name is Scott Atnip, your host today. I'll be moderating this first panel. I am Texas Impact's Outreach Director. And for those who are unfamiliar with Texas Impact, we are the state's oldest and largest interfaith network working on state legislative issues. Since 1973, Texas Impact has been advocating in the Texas legislature on behalf of the shared social concerns of mainline Texas faith communities and continues to be a leading voice on behalf of mainline denominations, judicatories, and interfaith groups on shared concerns ranging from strengthening the health infrastructure for vulnerable citizens, welcoming our immigrant, refugee, and asylum-seeking neighbors, protecting the climate, and importantly in this day and age, rejecting discrimination in all its forms. And in fact, these four issues are key in issues we're prioritizing as part of our Texas Faith Votes campaign, which you can find more information about on our website at texasimpact.org. That Texas Faith Votes campaign has three different components. First is our pledge to vote. We're asking Texans of faith to pledge to vote based on those four issues. And this is important because we're going to be letting our legislators know that mainline Texans of faith care about these issues and will be voting on behalf of those issues. And so if you want your elected representatives and candidates to know that you care about those issues, and they should be too, sign that pledge and promote it in your congregation and network so we can show the strength of mainline Texans of faith. Second, we're encouraging people to vote by mail, and we're particularly encouraging congregations to promote vote by mail to people who are eligible, which includes folks who are 65 plus and those with health concerns. Y'all, we're in the middle of a pandemic right now. I have no idea what it's going to look like in November, but we want as many people as possible to vote safely, both for their own health, the health of the poll workers, the election workers, but also for democracy, right? We want to make sure that there's no excuses. If people call in and say that they can't work because of the pandemic, we want as many people as possible to have already banked those votes so those lines will be short on election day. So promote mail-in voting now to everyone who's eligible. Apply today. Third, and this is true for everybody, but especially here in Huntsville, based on a conversation I had on Friday, we need as many people as possible to volunteer as election workers. Most of the election workers, in fact, somebody I heard from this week said the average age of an election worker in their community was 72. Well, here's the deal, y'all. Folks who are 72 might not need to be working the polls during a pandemic. So again, we don't want any excuses. We need as many young, healthy people as possible to volunteer to work on election day so that we make sure those lines and those polling locations are open. I talked to the office here in Walker County on Friday, and they said they're struggling getting enough people to volunteer. So if you're under 65, if you feel like you're healthy, go ahead and make that commitment today. We'll post the link in the chat section, but you can contact the local election office here, and they have a registration form online to get more information. So we hope as many of you as possible will volunteer to serve as an election worker and encourage your congregations to do the same. If you have questions about anything today, any of those or anything else, you can email me at scott@texasimpact.org, or if you want a quicker answer than that, we have Texas Impact staff who are stationed in the chat box. With us today in the chat box, we have our Executive Director, B. Moorhead, and our Advocacy Director, Josh Houston, who are going to be leading the second panel today at 4:15 on Advocacy 101. We also have our Membership Director, Emma Davis. We have our Communications Coordinator, Joe Zapp. We have a Policy Analyst, Sarah Cruz, and that's all I'm currently seeing. But feel free to ask questions in the chat. So last announcements before I introduce our panelists. Two final announcements. Number one, share this content. I remember there was a statewide candidate last time who said, if you're not sharing the content, it didn't happen, right? So we want you to use the hashtag Faith and Democracy. Let folks know you're watching. We'll have this available on Facebook Live and YouTube. as well as in our Texas Impact Weekly Witness podcast feed later in the week. So share the content. We need a movement of Texans of faith who are participating in justice work. Second, go ahead and start making a list today of all of the people who you want to follow up with to make sure they're registered to vote and pledged to vote. So all of the political minds are saying that's the most important thing we can do, is start making a list of people we want to reach out to and start those conversations today. All of this is especially important right now. We're in the middle of a year that will seemingly never end, right? Between pandemics, protests for racial justice, and policies that make us want to pull our hair out and scream. The world needs the faith community, especially the faith community that cares about justice and compassion, to be active and engaged. And here to talk about that with us today and to start the conversation are some amazing panelists. And I just have to say, as somebody who lives in Huntsville, I am particularly excited that we're starting this conversation here with some of my favorite people, both new and old. We have with us Reverend Coragee Hester from St. Paul's United Methodist Church. Reverend Hester, thanks for being with us. He's still muted, but hey.
Thank you for having me, Scott. Glad to be here.
All right, glad to have you. An old and dear friend, Reverend George Oliver. George, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Scott, for having me.
My pastor, Reverend Kimberly Carney from Wesley Memorial United Methodist Church.
Good to be here.
We have with us an elected official. We have from the Huntsville ISD Board of Trustees, Karen Olson-Williams. Karen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now I have to get my prop for the next one. It's probably not going to show up in my green screen. But one of my new favorite people, activist, president of Black Lives Matter, who, for those in Huntsville, was on the front page of the Huntsville item today with a special section. We have with us Nia Williams. Nia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, friends, I'm going to start out with the pastors. And Reverend Hester, I'm going to start with you. So I'm going to ask the three of y'all, from a theological perspective, why is it important that Texans of faith engage in activism? Reverend Hester, we'll start off with you.
All right. Thank you, Scott. For me, it's important for Texans, people of faith, to engage in theological matters simply based on the mission statement of Jesus, which is found in Luke chapter 4. After he was baptized and tested in the wilderness, in Luke chapter 4, it tells us that he comes to, in Nazareth, he comes to the temple. When he comes to the temple, to the synagogue, they give him the scroll to read, and they give him the book of Isaiah, and he turns to Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2, and he reads this: "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captive, and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." Then it tells us something amazing. It says he rolled up the scroll, he handed it back to him, and then he preached. This was the sermon he preached. "Today in your ears, in your eyes, in your sight, this is fulfilled." He said, that's what I'm here for. This is my mission. And so for me, I believe that it's important for us to be active and to be advocates and for people of faith to be engaged in democracy, because it's the mission statement of Jesus. But in that also, what Jesus does is what he's really offering is hope. He's offering hope. And I believe that is the necessary element, especially in the climate we're in today. That is what the church must represent, what we must continue while we are striving for unity and harmony, and we're continuing trying to promote social justice and more importantly, salvation. We must continue to offer people hope, because that message is vital in today's society, and it's vital in the political environment, it's vital in the everyday aspects, because what Jesus is literally saying is that I'm engaged in every aspect of your life. There's no separation of church and state for Jesus. Jesus is saying, I am here for the poor. I'm here for the brokenhearted. I'm here for the downtrodden. And I believe that is what we must be all concerned with, those of us who are people of faith.
Thanks, Pastor. Reverend Carney.
So I think it's interesting when people say to me on a regular basis, the Bible is religious, not political. And I would look at them and say, we are not reading the same Bible. We are not reading the same gospel. And I decided that in my self-isolation, I would look in the four gospels alone. And in the four gospels alone, there are over 75 mentions and examples of Jesus himself going up against the political structure that was the Pax Romana at the time, or the time of peace in Rome. And I think that the fact that the birth story in Matthew starts with, during the time of Caesar Augustus, a census went out. To separate the church from the state is something that occurred many, many, many years ago. We know that. But separating the church from the state does not mean separating the church from the wrong that is happening in the world in which we live. And I think that we as Christians need to remind ourselves that we don't live in a bubble, and that the world that we live in 2020, while very different than the world that the gospel was the context of, it's actually still very similar. And I think that the writers of the Gospels and our divine creator knew that power and oppression, orphans, widows, poverty, all of that was going to be a part of humanity in the creation. And I think that that is something that we are going to continue to encounter. And until the church finds a way to respond to that in a way that is grace-filled and accountable, people will continue to turn their back on the church.
Thanks. Reverend Oliver.
Well, first of all, let me just piggyback on these great pastors. Reverend Hester, my friend Coragee, he mentioned Jesus going into the synagogue. In the Greek, it says that when he read from the scroll of Isaiah, it says that he says, I have come to preach good news, in the Greek, to the tokos. The tokos being interpreted, most of us use it as poor. You better interpret it as the word beggar, or even better as the Reverend Dr. Bishop William Barber II says, he come to preach good news to those whom the systems have made to be poor. And so I think that that is exactly the thrust of the gospel, that Jesus walking into the church goes to tell the church, I've come to preach to people that you're not talking to. I've come to preach to people that have been dispossessed, disowned, and ignored. And God has said that the church must obligate itself with speaking not just to, but for those people and with those people. I think that Jesus, who all could agree died a quite political death being executed, Jesus also says that he died because he was preaching the kingdom of God. And most of us would want to try to make that a place like it's heaven, like where he was killed because he was talking about heaven. No, he was talking about heaven right here on earth. And the kingdom of God is his idea of a better place. It's his version of America, a place where people are equal, people have justice, people have an opportunity. They share their goods. They don't compete with one another. This is Jesus's version of a better government. So I think that the inherent thrust of Christianity is such a political place. We are trying to build a better realm right here on earth and to establish the kingdom that is within us, outside of us. And so in this season, I think it's important for us as ministers, not just sort of the ideas of the Bible, but to get into the nitty and gritty of what's going on in people's lives. when people are out in the streets risking life and limb to fight for equality and for justice because of people with Black skin and having feelings that their lives don't matter, that's important. And the church should have something to say about it. That COVID is running amok and destroying Hispanic communities and Native American communities. The church should have something to say about that. And not just to say about it, but to say to local governments that are doing most of the work about what's happening. So I think that churches have a responsibility to speak up, especially in a time right now where our doors are closed. There's no excuse for a single minister not to be on the streets doing something for the body of Christ.
Thanks, George. So we do these advocacy trainings a lot, and we'll talk about voting, and we'll talk about visiting with your legislators. But one thing we sometimes forget to say is that we can respond to our faith, we can respond to our desire to change policy outcomes by actually running for office. And one person on this panel has done that. Karen Olsen Williams ran for office and is currently serving as on the Huntsville IC Board of Trustees. So Karen, why did you choose to get involved in public service by running for office?
All right. Well, I grew up in Huntsville and I moved back here in 1999. And soon after that, I think in the first year or two that I was here, I ran into a woman. It was actually Jane Monday, who had been the mayor of the city of Huntsville for a time. And she told me, you should run for the school board. They could, and I had honestly never thought of it before. That was the first, that I really ever thought about running for any office or really thought about the school board. So it just kind of stayed in the back of my mind since that time, until the time when I was, I had 5 children, all daughters, and they were in school here, in the public schools here. The youngest was just 1 year old though. And I got the morning paper and saw that there were 2 open positions that were up for election that year. Miss Kay Douglas had been a long-serving member of the school board, and she was not running for re-election. So her spot was open, and the spot that had been occupied by another man who wasn't running were both open spots. And at the time, with 1 day left to file, 1 man had filed to run for each of those spots. And I just read the paper and just thought, I don't really think, and it was 2005 at the time, that's how long this has been, but that I just don't really think we should have a governing body of 7 men, in that time. It almost just got my attention. And I think I called my husband and I was like, hey, I think I'm going to do this now. That's how much because I was just anyway, so I'm up for re-election this year. I never thought I would do it this long, and I didn't do it. I didn't run for the purpose of some type of a faith agenda or something like that, but I am a person of faith, and I believe wholeheartedly in what Reverend Hester said, that we don't separate that part of ourselves. So if we are disciples of Christ, then we're saying with that we are standing as a witness of him in everything that we do. And I have definitely had many opportunities over the years that I've served on the school board to stand for what I believed was right, or to speak out for a group that may not be understood or marginalized. And so I'm grateful for it, even though in doing it, I kind of had no idea what I was getting into, so to speak.
I hope there are some other people who are listening today who will make similar decisions in the months or years to come. Our final panelist is somebody who I've been super impressed with over the course of the last few weeks, who saw injustice and has done everything in response to that injustice that I think people should do, and has done everything exactly right. So Nia, you have been a part of and are now playing a leadership role in a movement here in Huntsville as an activist with Black Lives Matter. What inspired you to become active in this way?
I think I come from a point of, because I'm young, I'm 25. So there's this general theme, when you're a young person, that when you see something wrong, you just kind of just get in this mindset of, well, it's always been that way, so it's going to stay that way. So we can't do anything about it. We can't change it. And me, when I hear that a lot in my age group, or even in people younger, that we have no power, we have no influence, we can't change anything. and also being a woman of color, and going off of what Karen was talking about when you see something being done a certain way for so long, and you kind of become ingrained in this process and this tradition and this ritual of it's always been this way, it's going to stay this way. It can't stay that way, because when we are a diverse city and just a diverse America, you have to be the change that you want to see. You can't just sit idly by, especially being young. We're the future of our community and of the world. We can't just sit idly by, especially when we see that a government board is homogenous in every sense of the word, be it race, be it orientation, be it background. No, like, we need to be able to be represented by what we are. Like, we're not just one race. We're not just from one background. So for me, it was standing up and just trying to be that face along with several others of my peers. And it's like, no, we have to advocate. We have to stand up and do something, because there's strength in numbers, and we are a powerful group. So if we can come together and do that, and if I, along with my peers, can work along together and just showcase and just be and put ourselves out there and be that change and be that voice, then we can create a movement of sustaining change that will shape the course of history moving forward for our city. I'm just going to keep it in Huntsville for now. And I think that advocating has always kind of been in my blood, because I am first of all, my dad, he considers himself a social justice pastor. So he's always been, fighting for justice, just forever, as long as I can remember, be it on every front, be it race, be it sexual orientation, every front, because we're all human. And so having that background, having a music therapy, that's my current study, having to advocate for that. I've been essentially immersed in advocacy, because even as music therapists, we have to advocate for what our profession is and what it isn't. So we need to, as young people, advocate for what our community is and what it isn't. So by saying such, it's like if we recognize that not everything is right in our community because we've just turned our blinders on. We've turned the blinds, we've drawn the blinds on a certain aspect because we don't know how to be when we see that, because that's not what we've been exposed to. That's not been our experience. I'm speaking for the majority here. That's not been our experience, so it's not real. So if Huntsville doesn't have like these issues of just social injustice, racial injustice, if we can believe that, like if we can believe that as a community, we won't get anywhere, because you're ignoring that percentage of people who have these experiences. So you're not a community because you're ignoring this pocket of people who had that experience. Talk to them, listen to them, because they are your community. There was an issue that we went through, and I apologize if I go on a tangent, because I've quite a bit to say here. But there's an issue that's been going around, because we're working on the Confederate monument, and for me it's like the history, like what is the history behind this? Not the narrative that we've been told throughout history, but what is the actual history? And so when we're dealing with that, and then we have issues in the community from a certain member of the community who's acting on his belief in that, and then he's interacting with my brother, who is also a face of what we're doing, and he's acting out of just severe just bias and just hate. And you try to bring that up to members of the other members of the community who are not seeing this, because they're not out there, they're not seeing this, and they shut you down. Because apparently Huntsville doesn't have these problems. That's a problem. No, you don't have that problem. You don't have that problem because you're not because you're not under that umbrella. So just because you don't have that problem, baby, does not mean it's not a problem. And I feel like as people of faith, because I do consider myself a person of faith, you can't just ignore that, because we're all people here. And if one of us has a problem, we all have a problem. Because if we're all children of God, and if one of us is fallen, if one of us is broken, then you come together and we help that one person so we can be better as a whole. So we can never be whole until we are all lifted up and we are all able to succeed together as a unit, as a community, and as a nation.
Amen. Getting applause from the muted folks online. That'll work. Thanks, Nia. The next question, we'll start back with Reverend Hester again. So I mentioned at the top, Texas Impact is promoting our pledge to vote based on 4 issues this year: health, climate, immigration, and a rejection of discrimination. I wonder what you hope Texans of Faith will be prioritizing in 2020 and why. Reverend Hester.
Okay. First, and I'm definitely mindful of time, but I just have to go back and applaud Nia and also Dr. Olson, our brother George, and Pastor Carney, Pastor Kimberly. One of the things that I keep hearing as we are sharing is, and Dr. Carney, Pastor Kimberly, she really kind of pulled it out for me, is this challenge of status quo. Pastor Kimberly made the comment that one of the reasons people are leaving church is because of basically that status quo mentality of just trying to have a form of religion, a form of godliness that allows us to check a box, but not being engaged in the social issues of our society. And excuse me, that was something that God was dealing with me about, because as an advocate and one who is trying always to pull others into community engagement and trying to get others to participate in different community issues, that's one of the primary boundaries that I run across. And what is just really becoming apparent is that people would much rather just deal with the having church, so to speak, side of it, and go home and just pray about it and let everything else work itself out. And don't get me wrong, I am strong in prayer. Believe that prayer is vital and necessary for our daily lives. It's our communion with God. But it calls for us to be more engaged and more active. And so for me, what I'm hoping is that first people will vote, that people will vote. You know, in the African American community, we are challenged with only voting for certain elections and only voting for candidates unaware of really the issues. And so it's important that we definitely get out and vote. I've read some statistics in Huntsville that show that if the African American community would vote, that we could really control a lot of these election races. And one of the things I find, and Dr. Olson talked about this, is that we're finding too many people are running unopposed. And for me, it feeds into, they say power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so what happens is people are running unopposed and they're in offices 10, 15, 20 years, and no one is even running against them. Then there's no system of checks and balances. And so there's no reason to be accountable to the entire community, only accountable to their base. And because of that, there is this political corruption, which we find. And so it's important that we vote, but also that we have viable candidates who will be engaged in the process and just hold that accountability. And so, and I believe that our faith is crucial in that. Our faith is vital to that personal response to the teachings of Christ in our individual lives. It's not for us just to go to church. It's not for us to have a private personal religion, but it's for us to live out that faith. I'm a preacher by nature, and the Bible comes out of me. But Jesus said like this, and you can't say you love me whom you have not seen, but don't love your neighbor that you see every day. And it is what Nia said. If one of us is hurting, we're all hurting. And I believe that there are two major ways that we can change culture. First is education. Second is voting. And you may want to flip-flop that, but those are two major ways that we can change the dynamics of our work.
Education and voting. I like it. Kimberly.
So I think I am a movie buff. I'm a U.S. history buff. My father is a U.S. history education major. And so for me, one of a presidential quote that has always stood out to me was President Reagan, I think it was, in Christmas of 1979, said that for the first time, the generation did not think that the following generation would be better than they are. And I see that happening more and more. And I think that that is because there continues to be this gap between the us and them, or the have and the have-nots. And I really, really think that in my position, I see people who come and request help for anything and everything all the time. And, as a blessed woman who has expensive pieces of paper that she will be paying for the rest of her life hanging on her wall, and having parents who put education first, I believe that the two most important things that we can do as Texans, and especially in our county, are healthcare through expanding Medicaid in the state of Texas, and also education, because it is really, really hard to have a conversation with someone when they're hungry. And I'm not just talking about spiritual hunger. I'm talking about in their belly hungry, or they are malnourished, or, they don't even know what a vegetable is because it's not available to them. And I think it's really easy to put that fault on other people in their lives. But I think that also comes with education. And I think that we are seeing in the past couple weeks, a lot of people in my circle, on my social media, who I grew up with, who are friends that I went to high school with, who have had the same access to social media and Google and everything else that I have, who don't understand white privilege, and that is a thing. And that comes with education. And you can call it whatever you want, but until we as a society prioritize people over the bottom line, we will continue to do a disservice to every generation following us. And I think to myself, what is it, if I were to have children, would I want to tell them? And it would be, if you can be healthy, if you can be educated, you already are on a different level than so many of the people in this state and in this county. And I think in 2020, in America, that's ridiculous. And I honestly think it's sinful, personally. And I think until we realize that we are literally starving people of their lives and their prosperity, we will not be able to see justice at any age, for any race, for any gender, for anything. And I think that the pursuit of happiness is very difficult when you're starving and you can't read.
Thank you. You get a gold star in our executive director, B. Moorhead's book for mentioning Medicaid expansion. Next up, George.
Well, let me just say, I think the question was about voting and what we prioritize. Let me just say it this way. This November, I plan to vote like my life is on the ballot, because indeed, with the leadership that we have in Washington and in Austin, my life has been on the ballot, and clearly it wasn't important enough to do much for. I think that the cataclysmic failures that we have seen at the federal and state levels when it comes to COVID is warning and wake-up call for all of us that we've got to take a larger stake in our local and state and federal governments, that we must have leaders that are responsive, not just to segments of voters, but to the entire population and to the facts. And that's one of the biggest things. So this November, I plan to vote like my life is on the ballot, because COVID-19 has proven that indeed it was on the ballot. I'm going to vote like my heart is on the ballot, like all of the people that I love, you know, my nieces and nephew, the children of my friends and other family members, the grandparents, the neighbors, the people. I just came from a funeral yesterday, a woman who got COVID and had pneumonia and died in Huntsville, the mother of one of my former teachers. So this is a painful reminder that this is real. It's close. It's not far away from us. It's right here in Huntsville. And so we do have to vote like what we love is on the ballot, because with them making decisions arbitrarily about how to send our kids back to school, we have to vote like what we love is on the ballot, because indeed what we love is on the ballot. And finally, we have to vote not like just our lives are on the ballot, not that just our hearts are on the ballot, but, you know, indeed, it's really about our values and what we value is on the ballot. You know, I value voting protections for all people, and in voting and people being included in these voting systems. That's not the case. You know, with our state government fighting, you know, people who are, you know, the expansion of mail-in voting, et cetera. We've just got to have a change in some of this government. And the only way we can do that is for people to go out this November on November 3rd and vote like your life, like your heart, like your values are all on the ballot, because literally they are. And this election season, we cannot fail. We can't fail ourselves. We can't fail our children. We can't fail our country or our democracy. Indeed, for the reign of truth, for the rule of law, we need people to vote like they've never voted before. And I think that as people of faith, the reason that we have to that is because if you're going to say, like, you know, Coragee mentioned at the beginning, that we're going to be preaching good news to the poor, you can't preach good news to the poor and not vote an agenda that elevates poor people's issues.
Mm-hmm. All right. Karen, what do you hope Texans of Faith will be paying attention to this year?
Well, I'm here because I'm on the Huntsville ISD Board of Trustees, right? But I'm also a doctor, so I'm always, my highest priority personally, almost every election that comes around for, you know, the big stuff anyway, is health. And obviously we're living during a pandemic. So for me, I always want to, for that to be a priority for people of faith, because I want people to realize that health is a human right, a basic human right. And like Kimberly said, if people are hungry and they can't get food, what more can you do? Or if they can't read, but also if they're sick and they don't have access to treatment for their sickness, then I think we also operate. Anyway. Okay. We also have, but I think for my highest priority this time, I think I would have to choose non-discrimination, because I really feel like we have new energy in that right now. We have seen a failure of our leaders to not only not discriminate, but to openly and blatantly discriminate and use hate and horrible words toward our fellow humans. And we're all in this together. How can we tolerate that in 2020? And I feel really like non-discrimination is the issue which touches all of the other issues, because non-discrimination is what we need in healthcare. Non-discrimination is what we need in education for opportunity. Non-discrimination is what we need for food access. I mean, almost every one of the issues that we consider that, you know, politicians debate and talk about are bigger problems because they're discriminatory in our country, in our county, in our state. And so I feel like that's the thing right now. We can't really fix these other things unless we fix that and look at it straight on. We're not going to fix it. I mean, we were just a few weeks ago at a school board meeting, we were looking at, we have to come up with like a plan to get a certain percentage of students to be able to read at a certain level or a certain degree of literacy in pre-K, Okay, so really young kids, and what the strategies are to do that and what the goals are for doing that. And I look at the goals and I'm like, okay, so, they always want to just, inch up a couple percentage points in every group. And the school districts all have to monitor progress among, these groups that we separate out. And the current rate of literacy that we were measuring in African Americans was low, so much lower than everyone else. And our goal was to increase it by a few percentage points. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I get it about making goals that are attainable, but also, come on, what's the problem? We can't, not one of us can be satisfied to think that if we inched that literacy rate up for small children up by a few percentage points, but it was still, 40% lower than everyone else, how on earth is that acceptable? That is not acceptable. And so I don't think unless we acknowledge that even our ability to accept that or put that low goal on paper is a sign of implicit bias in all that we do, unless we can recognize that and work to overcome it and deliberately change it, we're not going to achieve any of our aspirations in any of these areas. So for me, that's the big one this time for 2020.
Yeah, that's great. It reminds me, a couple of weeks ago, we had Christian Brooks from the National Presbyterian Church, their advocacy office, come on and do a presentation on the notion that we should look at every public policy issue through the lens of racial justice. And when we do that, it'll completely shift how we see a lot of different issues, like literally everyone. And so you're reminding me a lot of that conversation right now. So thanks for that. Nia, what should folks, Texans of Faith, be paying attention to this year?
I'm also going to kind of go off of Karen on the discrimination part of it. But it also kind of ties into politics and just voting in general. Because first of all, I think we all need to get out and vote, especially if you're young, because there's a lot of us and we have voting power. So don't say your vote if your vote didn't count. Let's abolish that first of all, because if your vote did not count, then these people in positions would not even be able to get elected because they depend on voters. So that's just that. But also in terms of discrimination, I've been hearing a lot about why do these issues only come up around election time? Well, let's back up a little bit and let's ask, why do these issues still keep coming up? Period. Not around election time. That's a cop-out. But just why do we still keep having these conversations? Even though I feel like we're in a much better place now because there's a lot more a sustaining of this conversation and getting out and asking questions and just trying to get people's thoughts and trying to effect some change. So that's something that I'm glad to see. But I feel like it all ties into understanding and listening and this conversation. Because people in general, when they are faced with the issue of discrimination, it's this cop-out culture that we're kind of stuck in a little bit. Whenever you bring up discrimination, people always have some kind of a rebuttal to negate the discriminatory act or just the topic in general. But let's stop that, because we need to, and we have the ability to do better. We have the ability to change. Instead of listening to respond, let's listen to understand. Because to bring it back to faith, God said, love thy neighbor. But not love thy neighbor, but it's love thy neighbor, period. And do you know what a part of love is? A part of love is listening, understanding, having empathy, and then working alongside your fellow man to help them and help just the world get to a better place. So let's start by having conversations, by actively listening and just listening to understand, because those are the biggest things I feel that people don't really have. They don't have that box all shaded in yet. Because people still are so quick to jump on their notions of what they think something is. But when somebody else is telling you, no, that's not my experience, we can't just put the lid on that. No, we have to unpack that. Because they have years of that. It's implicit now, because it's the reason why it only comes up sometimes is because people, they get so ingrained in just this way of life that they never unpack anything. But if you keep if the water is still boiling and you put the lid on it, guess what's going to happen? The water is still going to boil over. And so we're in this repeating, revolving door, the cycle of that happening. But we need to slow down, sit down, and talk. and have some empathy and understanding and truly show some love. Because that is the biggest sign of love is understanding and listening. And that's why I think we all need to just have, not just in 2020, but just going forward.
So put us, thank you all. I'm going to put us on a bit of a clock for this last answer because I'm looking at my clock right now. And I'm going to ask somebody from the Texas Impact team in the chat if y'all will put a link to the pledge to vote in the chat, but also in the Facebook Live comments, because my answer to the next question is going to be that everybody should pledge to vote and encourage their friends to register and pledge to vote. But the last question quickly to each of you is, what do you hope listeners will do next? Starting with Reverend Hester.
Okay, quickly. So I guess in the last question, I was still answering the first question, but I would say my biggest issue is non-discrimination in this election. So to answer the last question, non-discrimination. But what I would hope to happen in this election, for me, what we find ourselves in our world today, it's almost like God has put everything on pause. He is forcing us to look in the mirror at some things that we choose not to unlook. An average sports fan, Astros fan, Laker fan, I would really, golf fan, I would be looking at Tiger Woods and the Masters. I'd be looking at the Lakers in the finals, the Astros playing, and all these things that would help to distract us from the realities of our world. But it seems as if God, and I don't pretend to know the mind of God, but it seems God has caused us to have few choices, but to really look at our world, to look at what's going on in our world. And so for me, what I would hope is happening is that as baseball starts this week, as the NBA starts in a couple of weeks, as we have an abnormal to the normal we are accustomed to, and we begin to find some different ways to detach and distract ourselves from the present realities, that we don't allow ourselves to drift away, that we don't try and sweep it back on the rug and put it in the closet, but we stay focused. We all need to exhale sometimes. I took a trip last week to just get away. And when I took my trip, and when I started finding out about everything that was going on at the statue, and I was like, oh, the Lord took me away for a reason. but we must continue to stay focused and stay committed to where we are, because the world takes each of us being actively engaged and being committed and not allowing ourselves to drift. We need to vote, but we need to stay engaged. We have to do, as Pastor Kimberly says, have these honest conversations. And so that's my mission. I'm trying my best to bring as many pastors to the table, Black, white, Hispanic, Latino, so that we can have real conversations about the realities of our world and begin to open some dialogue that can foster growth and can foster some accountability and help us move beyond this impasse that we're in right now.
Kimberly.
So I'm going to wrap it up. My three hopes are this. Two of them are very serious, and one of them might be a little tongue in cheek, but it's one that I grew up seeing every single day on my parents' refrigerator. And the first one would be to realize that you don't have to agree with someone or like what they do in order to love them. Loving your neighbor as yourself doesn't mean that you have to agree with every single thing they do. It doesn't mean that you have to like every single thing they do. It doesn't mean that you have to take up every single mantle that they have. But it does mean that you have to love them. And that means that you have to respect them. And that means that they have the same voice that you do. They have the same rights that you do. And they were created by the same God that you are. My second one would be that people have person-to-person conversations, because it is really easy to sit behind a computer and lash out or share a meme or share a story without having to have any accountability. And I don't know that people realize the harm that does and the chaos that creates, and the schism and the brokenness that enhances in humanity. And if that's by telephone, if that is by Zoom call, if that is 6 feet away from each other, with a mask on, whatever it is, seek out someone who is different than you, who thinks different than you, and have an honest conversation with them. And be willing to say, maybe I wasn't right about that. Maybe you have a point. And it is very humbling, but it will change your life. And it will make this world a better place. And the third one, my hope is that, and I get up every morning, and this is part of my prayer every morning, is, Lord, if I can't say something nice today, help me keep my big mouth shut. Because I don't think that people realize the passive violence that occurs with the words that we use against each other. And we do not have the best examples on either the federal or the state or the local levels on how to be gracious in our talk and in our speech. And I think that we need to realize that only escalates the hatred and the violence. And just because you are loud doesn't mean you're right. I'll get off my soapbox.
And allow George to enter it.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Scott. Thank you, B. Thank you, Josh et al. for putting this on and giving us an opportunity to come together as people of faith to express what our concerns are. Back in the community, when I was growing up, there was an old saying that they would say, you better recognize. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we've got to have a moment where we go into this election season with full recognition of what's going on ahead of us. If I were focusing my sort of call to one thing, it would be for everyone to in this season use your voice and your vote. That there are many causes that you can stand up for. If you don't think it's right that almost half of Texans would be thrown off of their health care because they have a pre-existing condition, then you need to stand up and use your voice and tell Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, to pull that lawsuit that's going to the Supreme Court. If you think that it's important that kids be protected and teachers be protected in their schools, and that science means something, you'd better get up on November the 3rd and go vote and put somebody into office that will listen to you. But more important than anything, I think that we as people of faith need to remind people, sort of like Paul Tillich told us in The Courage to Be. He says at the end of ages, people start to lose their minds, that there's whole societies that just go crazy. And he says, and in times like that, what's the most important thing that we can have is people to have courage. That the only thing that has been known to offset this group neurosis is for people not only to just have courage, but to be their highest selves, the courage to be your highest selves. We can be a better state. We can be a better nation, and we need to have the courage to be that. But we can't live hiding in fear and gripping onto anxieties. What we must have are preachers and people who are willing to preach good news, even in the time of pandemic and in the time of protest. That there is something hopeful on the other end if we will just hold on and press toward that place. The way we do that is by amplifying our voices and definitely voting this November.
Amen. Karen.
Okay. I learned at a diversity training that we should focus more on sharing experiences over ideas. And I thought that was so helpful. It's short and easy to remember, but if you put out an idea, people can go to two sides of the room in 5 seconds. But if you sit, as others have said, and Kimberly was saying, if you sit and listen, and Nia said, if you listen to someone's experience, then you can't really choose one side or the other over it. Usually it's easier to see where someone's coming from if you share experiences over ideas. So I hope that we can all think about that and think about how we can not just share our ideas either, but share by listening. And then the other thing that I hope people of faith will do is to ask the same question that the rich young ruler asked the Savior, which was, what lack I yet? And I think that we all know that God calls us all to a purpose here during our time that we get to spend on the earth. And I believe there's things he wants us to do. And I think we should prayerfully ask him what those things are, what we need to do next, what's standing in our way, what do we need to understand better, what kind of actions do we need to take, and then move forward with faith.
Just want to say there is an elected official validating the very first slide on B's Advocacy 101 training that will come next.
Okay.
Sharing your experience pieces is where that conversation will start. So thank you. Nia, you want to close us out? What do you hope folks will do next?
I hope people will take the time and the energy to take themselves out of the equation. And let me elaborate a little bit. If someone shares an experience that is not your experience, take yourself out of the equation. Meaning, don't automatically take an offense to what is being like shared from that individual. If someone shares the experience of being discriminated against or just existing, don't automatically try to jump the gun and just think like, well, you're wrong because I've never experienced that, or like that's not real because that's not been my experience. Put yourself in their shoes. Think about how it would feel and what you would think if you were in their position. I feel like that would really allow us to move forward, because we're having to be more empathetic and be more loving and be more understanding, because it's no longer about us. Let them shine, let their experiences shine, and let them speak. Look at the human and act out of humanness. And then only from then will we ever move forward, because we're all people, we're all humans. I know I kind of touched on this earlier, but we just all need to be better at understanding and more loving, and not this like, well, this side or this side. It's not left or right. It's not Democrat or Republican. It's like, what are your experiences as a human, as a person, and how can we challenge that and make it better for everyone? And then of course voting.
Voting. Yeah, thank you. Y'all, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to do this. We have done a number of these faith and democracy events throughout the state and are gearing up for a busy fall. But this is the first time we've done it online. And I wish I could shake your hand or give you a hug afterwards to let you know that you have set a very high bar for the ones to follow. And so thank you for your time this afternoon, but more, thank you for your leadership each and every day, and your congregations and the community and in the world. You are all inspiring to me, and I look forward to hearing the feedback from this, but I know it will be great. So thank you all also for tuning in. We will have our Advocacy 101 panel, which will start at 4:15. It's on a different link. So if you can't find it, you can email me at scott@texasimpact.org and I'll send that over to you. But remember that this is a part of an ongoing series. If you want to check out more faith and democracy events this fall, we'll be promoting them at texasimpact.org. You can sign up for our emails there. I also hope that you will encourage voting, right? So Mel posted in the chat that every congregation should be making sure that 100% of their folks are registered to vote. We would encourage you to promote the pledge to vote, mail-in voting, and promoting poll workers. Y'all, we'll be happy to work with your congregation on the pledge. If you need help knowing who in your congregation has taken that pledge, so you can hold them accountable, let us know. If you need help promoting the mail-in voting or the poll workers, let us know, and we'll be happy to work with you or your congregation on that. And before we close out, Emma's on, so I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you that if you support the work of Texas Impact and programming like this, make sure that you and your congregation are members. You can join by going to texasimpact.org/join. Y'all, thanks again for your time this afternoon. Make sure to share the content, and we will look forward to seeing you again soon. So we'll see you on the 4:15 line. The link is now in the chat. We'll see y'all over there soon. Thanks, friends.
Thank you.